gang, we're back again, and thank you for joining us on this episode of the SIP series On the Stir. I'm your host, Trish Muyco-Tobin, and here she is, my special guest host, co-host, our resident movie maven and must-see movie list generator, Debbie Baldwin. Hello, Debbie.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Of course.
Excited for today?
Yeah, so last week, we presented you with something that was relatively fun and light. With our list of top rom-coms, romantic comedies that you probably haven't seen and are definitely worthwhile for binging purposes. So this week, Deb, we're upping the old blood pressure a bit, getting that heart rate going with a must-see movie list that fill in the blanks.
I would say that, as we've been calling it, movies with a twist. My kids always ask me for recommendations of films with a good plot twist in them. Now, it's sort of a pain because by telling someone that there's a twist, you're changing the way they watch the movie. Even though we agreed that we are not going to do any spoilers today.
We're doing our best.
We're going to do our best. Knowing there's a twist is almost enough in some cases. In others, you may even know the whole plot and not know what happened at the end of the movie. One in particular is coming to mind, which we'll get to.
Sure.
Yeah, so this is a list of, I think it's magic and mystery, and I'm ready to dive in if you are.
Lots of combinations here. Of course, you know, for the most part, we're talking about suspense thrillers, but like you said, there's a lot of other genres figuring into the mix that make it a little bit more exciting. So when you think of benchmarks for this category as a whole, we're talking films like Psycho in 1960 with Norman Bates, or a little bit more recent, like 1995's The Usual Suspects with the search for Keyzer Soze, and also 1999's The Sixth Sense with Haley Joel Osment's star turn with that famous line, "I see dead people."
Dead people.
Yeah, so this is kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And again, I'm super excited because half the list of these movies I haven't seen. So I'm psyched. And you know what, Deb? I mean, we're talking about the twists in these movies. Even if you've never seen the movie before, the mere mention of the movie itself, a lot of them have been part of our pop culture psyche that you kind of already know what it is all about based on like a famous line or, you know, an actor who played it. So we're going to get started with one of those movies. And we're going to start with 1973. And Deb, apparently this is the most bizarre riddle to face mankind. What is the secret of Soylent Green? And that is the movie Soylent Green. And go for it.
This movie, the most famous line in the film is the spoiler, is the twist. So we won't say it, but
we won't say it.
I have to say, I rewatched Soylent Green, which is, as you mentioned, 1973 Charlton Heston futuristic science fiction film. It's set in 2024, right around the corner.
Seriously,
And due to overpopulation, pollution, and climate crisis, there is a food and water shortage. I mean, this movie is prophetic. It's incredible, the accuracy of so much of this kind of setting.
I was going to say 2020 is saying, hold my beer.
Right. It's chilling. But there is Charlton Heston plays a New York City cop where there's a huge divide between the wealthy who eat well and live in beautiful apartments and the poor who don't. And the temperature is extremely hot, and Charlton Heston is investigating, and he stumbles upon this curiosity about the food supply used to feed the masses. And the film is just this suspense thriller of Charlton Heston trying to solve this mystery of the title Soylent Green, which is this kind of all-purpose food protein source for this, people who are starving.
And talk about getting the heebie-jeebies. Talk about spot-on prophecy, Deb.
Yeah. I mean, it's
seriously, this movie is just a little creepy to me.
Yeah.
But one of this film's distinction outside of all that is that this is one of the final films shot on the storied MGM backlot, which, as you movie fans know, it was considered Hollywood's greatest backlot. And shortly, a couple years after this film was shot, the location was demolished, and where it is now is where the Sony Pictures complex now sits, the big theme park like Sony Pictures complex. So yeah, which I found really interesting. Did not know that the MGM backlot lasted until about the late 70s.
That is interesting.
Yeah. All right. So from the 70s, we are going to jump into the 1990s, the mid 90s to be exact. And we're going to talk about a 1996 film called Primal Fear. I remember seeing this in the theater. Deb, wow, what a cast too.
I mean, I have to say, I saw this film in the theater too and knew nothing. So what a fantastic way to see this movie. Edward Norton, I believe it's his debut role. He was nominated for an Oscar. Plays a young kid who is accused of murdering a Catholic archbishop. And Richard Gere is a prominent defense attorney who steps in for the notoriety to defend this kid pro bono. And as he is mounting his defense, he starts to realize that there's a lot going on beyond the murder of this archbishop, and that this archbishop may have had a dark past and have been, sexually manipulating these boys who are altar boys. And then something else emerges with the Edward Norton character where Richard Gere begins to suspect that he may have associative identity disorder, and that his personality, Aaron, has developed another personality to defend him in times of crisis, and that Richard Gere is proceeding to mount his defense and try and prove that the Edward Norton character in his main persona as Aaron is not culpable for this murder of this archbishop. Correct. And I mean, that is just the tip of the iceberg for this film. There is so much interest. You cannot stop watching this movie. Every minute of it, every scene, the acting is so incredible. I mean, Norton absolutely deserved that Oscar nomination. His performance is unbelievably good. So yeah,
seriously, from start to finish, you are hooked. And so we've got Richard Gere, Ed Norton, but we also have a stellar supporting cast. We've got Laura Linney, John Mahoney, Alfre Woodard, Andrew Brar. So pretty solid film through and through. And you mentioned that this was Ed Norton's film debut. This role was considered to be a career-making role back in the day. And so they actually had, Deb, I don't know if you knew this, but they had about 2,100 people audition for the role of Aaron Stampler, which was the role that eventually went to Edward Norton. That's how star-making this role potentially was. And Ed Norton, of course, went on to star in Fight Club, American History X, among other things.
There's a moment in the film, it's sort of a pivotal moment, when they're videotaping Edward Norton's character trying to get the story of what happened. And he shifts with just a look of his eyes. And I mean, every single person in that movie theater knew exactly what had happened without a single word being spoken. It was amazing. I mean,
yeah, seriously, if
yeah.
you haven't seen this film, it definitely belongs on that list.
Yeah.
We're going to go 1 year later into 1997, and we're going to talk about a film called The Game. I don't think this did particularly well at the box office, Deb, but I remember seeing it in the theaters and was definitely captivated by the entire plot. And we're talking The Game with Michael Douglas and also Sean Penn.
I loved The Game. I loved it when I saw it in the theater. I've seen it since. Michael Douglas and Sean Penn play estranged brothers. Michael Douglas, almost has his greed roll back. He's a, kind of a disillusioned investment banker
Right.
living in this giant house and with his estranged wife, and his kids don't talk to him. And his brother, played by Sean Penn, Conrad, appears at the door one day for his birthday and says, call this, gives him a business card and says, call this number. It's my birthday gift to you. And essentially, it's a game, like a live action, I think Michael Douglas's character thinks it's a sort of a scavenger hunt or a whodunit, like a live action mystery, and is not really that interested. But at his athletic club, the next day, he runs into a couple of men in the locker room who have done it and played the game and said it's changed their lives. It was such a great experience. So Michael Douglas goes to this mysterious, it has a 3 initial name, like Creative Recreational Services or something, and goes through all these elaborate psychological tests and then is informed he's been rejected. His application has been rejected. So that's the setup. And then he proceeds to go back to his normal life, and a lot of strange things start happening. And I mean, that's sort of the initial twist. And then on and on it goes. And,
exactly.
Definitely
keeps you riveted to the very end.
Yeah.
Speaking about twists, in terms of casting, I just learned that Jodie Foster was originally hired to play Michael Douglas's sibling. So it was supposed to be a sister instead of a brother.
Interesting.
So instead of Sean Penn. But apparently Jodie Foster was not liking the idea. She thought the age difference was too much. So she tried to convince the studio to revise the script to make it Michael Douglas as her father instead, and she's the daughter who introduces him to the game. Michael Douglas and the director did not like that idea, so Jodie Foster was out. She was hired. She actually took the studio to court and settled out of court. But imagine how different that would have been.
Yeah.
Had it been a man-woman dynamic versus these two brothers, with Michael Douglas and Sean Penn versus Michael Douglas and Jodie Foster.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I have to say I agree. I mean, it's always easy to Monday morning quarterback these things, but it's hard to imagine it as a father-daughter scenario. The brothers, I think, work much better as far as a plot mechanism. But, it's like Jodie Foster, Sean Penn, you've got 2 of the greatest working actors alive, so.
Right.
I'm sure Jodie Foster could have pulled it off. Yeah, it was better the way it was.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely enjoy that movie. All right, so we're still in the 1990s, late 90s, 1998 to be exact. And we're going to talk about the movie Wild Things, which, Deb, I have to admit, I did not see. But I can't believe I did not see because it has Kevin Bacon. And I'm a Kevin Bacon fan. Oh, my God.
Kevin Bacon, Matt Dillon, Denise Richards, and Neve
Campbell.
And this movie, I could tell you 4 plot twists in this movie without giving away the final twist at the end. This movie changes what's going on frequently. So Nev Campbell and Denise Richards play high school students who are suing, who accuse their guidance counselor of rape. That's how the film starts.
Okay.
Then the case goes to trial, and almost immediately on the stand, the girls confess to fabricating the story out of resentment for Matt Dillon's character. Matt Dillon plays the guidance counselor.
Guidance counselor, okay.
Because he was having an affair with one of the girls' mothers. Then we have the switch where now Matt Dillon's character, Sam, is suing the girls for defamation of character. And they settle for $8 or $10 million. And then you get the Kevin Bacon character, who is a police detective who begins to suspect that there's some collusion going on between the girls and the guidance counselor.
Something's off, yes.
Something's off. I mean, I'm going to leave it at that. Like, that's the initial setup. And there's so many twists and turns. This is a great movie. It has that a little bit, I'm trying to think, the year was 98, but it really almost feels older than that because of the stars mainly. Matt Dillon, you know, is great. And he has transitioned into his age, you know, his age playing older characters really, really well. From his like pretty boy days. And this movie is just a interesting, complicated, it's maybe a little overthought in terms of the plot lines. Like, there's such a thing as too many twists, I guess.
Sure.
But it's a really good movie, really interesting. It was raised a lot of eyebrows at the time of its release for some very risque scenes. So
see, that's all I remember about that movie when it came out. I distinctly remember the movie poster where you have the two female leads in the water with their eyes kind of, something's up, something's going on, and that's kind of all I remember. And so, yes, this movie is very intriguing to me now.
Yes. And very steamy.
Very steamy in more ways than one. All right, so we're going to move on to our next movie. And we are moving on to the year 2000. And this movie we saw in the theater. And I have to say, a movie like this, you almost have to see in the theater so it has your undivided attention. You can't go anywhere. You can't pause. You can't go to the bathroom, you know, that kind of thing. And we're talking about the film Memento.
Yes. And there are a couple of movies on this list that are the same way, where you have to pay attention. If you're renting this movie for teenagers to watch, which I think, if I'm remembering it correctly, is acceptable, make sure their phones are off. Because if you're not really focused on Memento, the story is about an insurance investigator played by Guy Pearce, who has a brain injury that, as a result, has no short-term memory. He is trying to solve the murder of his wife. So as a result, he collects, because he has no short-term memory, he collects Polaroids and tattoos his body with important facts to proceed with his investigation.
So he won't forget they're there.
Right, so he can remind himself. I mean, there's limited space to how much you can tattoo on your arm, so he perhaps misinterprets a few things. But he encounters a couple of people during his investigation, one of which is who's a character named Teddy, played by Joe Pantoliano. Another is a bartender named played by Carrie Ann Moss. And it's just the story of the Guy Pearce character trying, with no short-term memory, to piece together the events that led to the murder of his wife. I mean, this movie will make your head explode. It's so good and so smart, and I mean, the acting is fantastic.
Oh
It's
my gosh, Guy Pearce was great in this movie.
great.
And, to help you along, the director actually, I learned this word. It's a Russian word. It's a shuzhe. This film is structured as such, and that means it's presented with two timelines. In this particular movie, one is presented in black and white, one is presented in color to kind of give you some organization there as you're following along. Deb, this entire film was shot in 25 days. Is that even realistic?
And that's amazing to me. I did know that they'd shot it on a very short time frame, and you can sort of see by the fact that, I mean, it almost has the feel of a stage play because so much of it takes place in these very sort of confined spaces.
Yeah.
This is a Christopher Nolan film. There could be 5 of his films on this list easily. I narrowed it to 2.
Yes.
But yeah, so but that's, I mean, that's a month. They shot this film in a month.
Less than a month.
My favorite films.
Yes. Okay. So as an aside, for some reason, a lot of the films on this list had me consulting with WebMD to find out if some of these ailments are actually legitimate. And so Guy Pearce's character, Leonard Shelby, I believe was his name, he had anterograde amnesia, which is a real condition, and it's the inability to form new memories due to damage in the hippocampus in the brain. So there you go. It wasn't made up. That can happen to people. So speaking of conditions and ailments, our next film has another real condition, and we're talking about, actually, this is the same year, and it is Unbreakable with Samuel L. Jackson and Bruce Willis, and this is an M. Night Shyamalan film.
And you talk about another director who could have 5 films on the list. We skipped over The Sixth Sense because that's his most famous film, and everybody at this point knows the twist. And this film also stars Bruce Willis, and he plays a former football quarterback who is now a security guard. Samuel L. Jackson, his counterpart, co-lead in the film, is a comic book dealer with brittle bone disease, which is
osteogenesis imperfecta.
And has the Samuel Jackson character has led a very, he goes by Mr. Glass or Glass, and he has led a very troubled life as a result of his condition. He, being surrounded by comic books all day as a comic book dealer, he begins to develop this fantasy that because he is so fragile and frail, that in this sort of yin-yang sense of the way comic books create heroes and villains, that there must be someone in the world who is unbreakable, the opposite of him. And he is trying to track down his soulmate, for lack of a better word, or
sure,
his puzzle piece. And Bruce Willis has this very interesting history where he has never been sick and he's never broken a bone, and he, at the beginning of the film, survives a horrific train accident. And that is the event, the seminal event that leads Samuel L. Jackson to seek him out as possibly the unbreakable match to his breakable. That's all.
We're going to leave it at that.
It continues to get good. I loved this movie. Everyone kind of, the problem with M. Night Shyamalan is that Sixth Sense was so beyond that everyone sort of left his, the subsequent films a little disappointed. But The Village, this movie, The Happening, I mean, they're all, really interesting films in their own right. And this film,
Sure.
I thought, and it really sort of gathered strength as it was out there, which prompted the sequel, which came out a couple of years ago.
Right. And, again, this is credit to the director, M. Night Shyamalan. He apparently came up with the idea for this movie while filming The Sixth Sense with Bruce Willis. So he already knew he wanted Bruce Willis in this movie. And he also wrote the part of Elijah Price for Samuel L. Jackson.
M. Night is obviously known for these plots, but we cannot discount the acting in this film because Samuel L. Jackson is absolutely unbelievably good in this role. I mean, to play a character with a brittle bone disease like that, it's so believable. Every time he takes a step or walks out of the house, your heart is in your mouth. I have to applaud that performance. It was amazing.
Oh yeah, I completely agree with you. All right, so we're going to move on to the next movie on our list, and that is this is maybe more categorized into a horror movie, and that is The Others, and it is starring Nicole Kidman.
Well, I mean, it's definitely a ghost story for sure. Nicole Kidman plays a mother with two children who have another ailment. And I thought this might be what you were talking about, which is photosensitivity. They cannot be outside in the sun for any period of time.
Xeroderma pigmentosum, Deb. A very rare disease, extreme sensitivity to sunlight. Only about 1,000 people in the world have it, but it is not made up. It is a real ailment.
Well, there you go. And I'm trying to keep this story straight in my head. Nicole Kidman plays a mother with a husband who was missing, I think,
in the war.
In the war.
Yes.
She is home in their British estate in Jersey with a small staff, and she begins to hear a lot of very weird, there's just a lot of strange things that are going on in the house. She hears footsteps and piano music playing, and the housekeeper comes to her and says she dreamt or had this vision of this family in the house saying it was their house and that they wanted us to get out. Get Out. There was another movie we should have put that one on the list. Oh, but I didn't. Anyway, and that's the story is Nicole Kidman trying to resolve this ghost or, trying to jive it with what's happening with her husband. There's a cemetery near the house, and she wants to see if this boy named Victor, who the name keeps popping up, is buried in the cemetery, if he's haunting this house. And it's a ghost story, and there's a good twist.
Sure, and that's enough to make anyone living in that house cuckoo. So yeah. She's there with the two kids who are kind of paralyzed with this ailment. They can't go outside. Apparently, so I did not know this, but they considered 5,000 children before finally casting child actors Alakina Mann and James Bentley, because they really needed to get the right temperament from the child actors to just really go toe-to-toe with Nicole Kidman. And they found it in these two, and my gosh, to great effect in the movie, definitely.
Yeah, and it's a great story. It really keeps you, with that what the hell is going on feeling a lot of it. And, it's scary, but it's not, I'd definitely categorize it as suspense. But yeah, so that's a good one. It's a good one and a good twist.
Okay, so what do you think? It was announced this spring that a remake of The Others was in the works, and they're going to set it to present day. Thoughts?
It's tough. It's very tough to remake a movie with a twist like that because the people that are interested
People
in
already
seeing
know.
it already know. So, it's kind of a big spoiler alert, and um, I I don't have much interest in seeing it, I have to say, unfortunately. Once you know what's going on and all these little, machinations of the staff and of the house, it kind of takes a little of the air out of the balloon. You know what I mean?
Sure, and I figure the same thing, but we'll see what happens. We'll see. So we're going to move on to a David Lynch film, and every time you hear the name David Lynch, you're already, what's going to happen now. And we're talking about the film Mulholland Drive. Deb, this movie apparently was intended as a TV series, kind of like a spin-off to Twin Peaks, which he will really put him on the map. But there were no takers to the TV version of it, so David Lynch actually had to create an ending to turn it into a feature film.
This movie, I'm still not sure what the hell happened. It's the kind of movie that makes you want to jab a fork in your thigh while you're watching it to try and get everything straight. I can't even really begin to describe the plot, or we will be here all day. But let me just say that the film stars Naomi Watts and Laura Herring, and there are tons of twists, I think. Naomi Watts plays two characters, as does Laura Herring, and it's the story initially of the Laura Herring's character, who goes by Rita, after a head injury from a car accident. She sees a poster for Gilda and starts calling herself Rita after Rita Hayworth.
Rita Hayworth, yes.
Wanders into an empty apartment after her accident, where she comes across Betty, who's the Naomi Watts character. And together they work to try and solve this mystery of this car crash where this woman was the only survivor. There comes into play this film director who's played by Justin Theroux, who's being muscled by the mob into casting a certain person in a role. There's all kinds of Hollywood stuff going on, and there's a blue box and a blue key. I mean, I'm telling you, this movie is an acid trip of a film, but it is fantastic. Naomi Watts is so, you can see, she has such, she has a similar backstory to this character in her Hollywood journey. She and Nicole Kidman were good friends. Nicole Kidman made it much sooner in her career than Naomi Watts did. This is Naomi Watts is really her breakthrough role.
Yes.
And she is so dead on perfect for this part because she has that kind of wide-eyed, old world, ingenue innocence about her in the film, and yet there's depth to her character. I can't even begin to get into, I guess you could say that there's a shift in the film where Lynch somewhat explains what's going on with this big twist. And that being said, the plot and the explanation is 100% open to interpretation. I know what I think happened. My husband thinks he knows what he thinks happened.
So let me guess, two different thoughts here.
Yes. And there's a lot of possible explanations, but it's one of those movies you definitely want to go out for drinks or coffee afterwards and, hash it up with
talk it out.
I mean,
so this sounds like the kind of movie that requires at least the second viewing if you are trying to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't want to steer people away from it because it's surreal. It's literally.
No, it's definitely my kind of movie. It sounds like.
That's what they call it. And it can certainly be watched and enjoyed the first time. It's just a little trippy. So,
Well,
and
we're talking David Lynch.
yeah, and you
Well, you
will
know,
want to
Mr.
watch it again.
Lynch feels your pain. He actually came up with a list of 10 clues to unlocking the story. We're, of course, not going to say much about it, but the very first, the number one item on that list that David Lynch himself made up was that you need to pay particular attention to the beginning of the movie. There are at least two clues that are revealed before the opening credits even come on. So that kind of sets you up for what kind of movie this is. You really need to pay attention.
Yes. And I mean, I think you can enjoy it just sitting back and watching it, but just know that it's going to be this very kind of surreal experience. If you want to break it down, Lynch swears that it's a logical, that the plot makes sense in a logical mind. The actors even don't necessarily agree.
Exactly.
But you can try and figure it out. I certainly am that type of movie watcher. I've watched it 3 or 4 times.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, folks, you've been warned, but again, this is my kind of movie. It sounds like it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to move on to 2013, and we're going to talk about a film called Now You See Me.
Now You See Me. What a pleasant surprise this movie was. It was, as you said, a 2013 movie about a group of magicians. It is a heist movie. The cast, it is an ensemble cast with a laundry list of great, really entertaining actors that I love to watch on camera. Woody Harrelson, Jesse Eisenberg, Isla Fisher, Mark Ruffalo. I mean, these are all in their own right. Dave Franco, people that I would go to see a film with them for just them. And they're all together in this group. They each have a different talent in the magic world.
Don't forget Michael Caine and Morgan Freeman.
And Michael Caine and Morgan Freeman, and Michael Caine, honestly, a list about suspense movies, psychological dramas, thrillers with a twist would not be complete without at least one movie. I think we have 2.
Right.
And at least one magic movie, and we have 2. So, and this movie is just the twisted tale of Woody Harrelson trying to organize these magicians together to pull off a series of heists. And I don't want to give too much away. It's one of those movies where I went in with the bar set very low. And I was literally thinking to myself, I was sitting in the audience, if this movie pays off, like if there's a jackpot at the end, I always used to have this metaphor in my head of a jackpot, like you're watching movies like this and it's like you're putting coins in a jackpot. And then at the very end of the movie, if you pull the arm and the money comes out the bottom with a great, smart resolution, it's just it's rare, but it's great. And this is one of those movies. I wasn't really expecting this smart, well thought out.
Well, I mean, you were right about that because, when you do see the slate of actors involved with this movie, it could be, like you said, a nice surprise and it's an excellent movie. Turns out to be an excellent movie, or it could be the exact opposite where you just have these A-list actors just kind of phoning it in,
Right. Exactly. Like they didn't need to make it as good as they did. They had like so much appeal in their cast. Yeah.
Okay, well, since I'm a huge Morgan Freeman fan, one thing that I did notice about this movie, Morgan has a line, and he says, "These bars give a man time to think." Does that line sound familiar to you, Deb?
Is it from Shawshank?
Yes, it's the same line that Red says in The Shawshank Redemption, which of course Morgan Freeman stars in with Tim Robbins, which was about 20 years prior to Now You See Me. But they did give homage to that line, and I caught that, and I was so proud of myself. I'm like, oh, that sounds so familiar, and that's where that came from.
Cool. You know, this is a little off topic, but I did notice in I think it's the third 50 Shades of Grey movie, which stars Dakota Johnson, who's the daughter of Melanie Griffith. that there's a scene in that movie when she's in her office behind her desk and her assistant comes in and says, what do you expect? You know, what's my role as your assistant? And she delivers the identical line that Melanie Griffith delivered in Working Girl.
There you go.
I expect you to call me Tess. I don't expect you to fetch me coffee unless you're getting some for yourself. Anyway, just a little trivia.
Which is kind of always very cool when you catch it, you know, and you give yourself a pat on the back for doing so. So speaking of this movie, we were talking how it kind of goes hand in hand with The Prestige because of some common denominators. We're talking magic movies. We're talking Michael Caine, both starring in these two movies. And of course, we're talking about that twist ending. So we want to give special mention to The Prestige as well, which, you know, Michael Caine was in a supporting role. The lead roles were Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale.
Yes, and this movie is from 2006. Again, this is a movie I went into The Prestige going, I have no idea what to expect. I didn't even know the reference to the title, which is one of the phases in an illusion or a magic act. The Prestige is the big final reveal. Again, this is another Christopher Nolan movie. I mean, where would we be without Christopher Nolan? Starring Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale as rival magicians, constantly trying to one-up each other to create the perfect illusion. These two men, who were not exactly household names at the time, really hit it out of the park. One of them you're rooting for, the other one is kind of a bad guy. The illusion that they're attempting to perform is riveting, and all of these little machinations that go into creating these illusions. You know, the one character's wife leaves him, she kills herself because she can't cope with his obsession. And then, you know, as is the case in all the movies on our list, there's a phenomenal twist at the end.
Oh my God.
Your head wants to explode. It's fantastic.
But just getting there, I mean, you see how smartly conceived this film was. And then just have those two outstanding performances by these two actors. And it's just fun to see them duel, you know, on screen.
Oh my God. And I mean, to carry that off. And here's the thing about these movies is when I'm like compiling a list like this, I would ask myself the question, would this movie be great, really good without the twist? And this movie, yes, it's so interesting. The twist is like a cherry on top at the end. You know, it's really like as if it weren't enough to have a story. To then add this sort of mind blow weirdness at the end is fantastic. Really entertaining.
Excellent, excellent movie. All right, we're going to move on to a movie I am not familiar with at all, Deb, and that is 2014's Ex-Machina.
This movie, there's so few films that I can see in the theater and race home and tell my kids to watch because, you know, I think just with texting and, you know, I've mentioned this before, it's hard to get a kid to really zero in on a film or give it the full attention. And this movie is one of those that grabs you from the get-go. Not in a, you know, exploding, you know, building kind of way, but the character, I think his name is Caleb, who's played by, I don't know how to pronounce his name. It's
Domhnall Gleeson.
Domhnall Gleeson.
Yes.
So we'll call him Caleb. Wins a prize. He's a programmer at, I mean, you can call it Google or it's called Blue Book in the film, but it's the largest search engine computer company in the world. And he wins a week at the home of the reclusive CEO of the company, played by, I almost said Mark Ruffalo, because these two actors are very similar.
I get it, what you're talking about. Yeah. Oscar Isaac.
Yes. And it turns out that Oscar Isaac's character has been working exclusively on developing artificial intelligence at his home, out of his lab in his home. And he tasks the Caleb character with assessing his creation and determining if it is believable as human, despite the fact that it's a robot. The robot is played by Alicia Vikander, who is a foreign actress. I want to say she's Swedish, but I'm not 100% sure.
Swedish or Danish, one of the two.
Yeah. And she received a ton of recognition for this role as the AI being. And the story, I guess the hook is that the Caleb character starts to develop this attachment to Ava, is the robot's name.
As expected, Deb.
And, but when the Oscar Isaac character is developing these robots and they don't function correctly, they go in the scrap pile. And the Caleb character is trying to, I want to say free her, but it's a little more complicated than that. So again, this is a smart movie. It's so interesting. It has I feel like I'm going to give something away if I compare it to another.
Yeah, we don't want to.
Yeah.
That's where the plot thickens. And one thing that I just found really interesting about this movie is that it was a relatively low budget movie, $15 million, but it won the Oscar that year for Best Visual Effects, beating out big budget movies like The Revenant, Star Wars Episode 7, and Mad Max. That is unbelievable.
They were very clever with their visual effects, because if you are a connoisseur of that kind of stuff, a lot of the film was shot through glass, like either like an observation room or windows. So they had some wiggle room to kind of fudge the tech and make it seem more believable because of the distance of the audience member and the character observing in the film. So it was really great, the special effects, even though it was a fairly low budget film, as you said.
Yeah, well, consider me intrigued, because I do love watching Oscar Isaac, and when I found out he was in this film, I added it to my list. And speaking of our list, we are coming to the end of our list with a relatively new film from last year. In fact, it was, well, if you haven't heard of it, you've really been living under a rock. Historic Oscar win for Best Picture, and that is the movie Parasite. Also won Best Director for Bong Joon-ho, Best Original Screenplay, and Best International Feature Film. And that was pretty much a given. Once it won the Best Picture, it's going to win. And talk about a twist, not just the storyline for this movie, but just the fairy tale story of this particular movie, how it came to be, and how it ended up on the Oscar stage.
Well, do you want to tell us?
Well, I mean, it was just unexpected. I mean, it opened at Cannes Film Festival. It won the biggest prize, which was the Palme d'Or, and it has highest grossing South Korean film of all time. The budget was only, talk about a small budget, $11 million, and it has so far made $264 million so far. But let's talk about this movie in terms of just how it's set up and the storyline and how strange it was.
I have to say, and the twists start fairly early in the film, so we're gonna have to give the setup and let people go from there. And the setup is fantastic. This movie, one of my kind of beefs with this movie is it pulls the rug out from under you in a weird way. It's set up as a comedy, and almost immediately takes a turn in another direction. And I'm not a huge fan of that.
You don't like the old genre switch in the middle of the movie?
I like to know what I'm in for. You know, you sit back and you're starting to laugh. It starts off in this young man in South Korea. His best friend, who's going off to college, asks him to take over his tutoring job, which he does. It's an incredibly wealthy family, and I'm assuming Seoul. He gets to the house and he's tutoring the little girl, and he realizes that he can get his sister a job in the house as well. That these people have money to burn, and the wife is perfectly willing to hire a staff, and they need another. I'm spacing on what the daughter was hired to do.
The daughter was hired to almost be like a counselor to the son.
Right.
To the young son.
They have 2 children, and so the one boy is a tutor to the little girl, and his sister assumes another identity and becomes like a counselor or a nanny to this little boy.
Exactly.
That, you know, it just starts snowballing. Then the brother and sister decide they can get rid of all the existing staff and replace them with their family, and they'll all have these incredibly lucrative jobs in this gorgeous mansion.
Yes.
And
the way they get to how they do that is really the strange, twisty part of this movie, and how you said it takes a turn.
Yeah, and the house itself is, I mean, it's almost worth seeing the movie for that. That house is incredible.
And I'm pretty sure everyone has an idea of what this house looks like because it's been pretty prominent in the movie posters.
In the posters, yeah.
So believe it or not, Deb, that house was not real. It was built on set completely from scratch.
Unbelievable.
Can you imagine? So yes. And when they actually, and it was built by the set designers, the production set designers. And when they actually consulted an actual architect, the architect said, "You guys are crazy. This home would not work in the real world." But of course, they had to build it for just the space and making sure it accommodates the cast, and also for the lighting, you know, the production department for the lighting. But no, it wouldn't exist in the real world.
Yeah. Well, this film, you know, we've talked about Parasite before. It's not my favorite movie. It's, you know, I, again, you know, didn't love that genre shift.
But talk about a gut punch twist.
Absolutely. And it 100% deserves to be on the list, especially if people haven't seen it. They may be shying away from the fact that it's got subtitles.
You don't even notice it.
You really don't even notice. You get very absorbed in that film almost immediately. So, you know, the director did a fantastic job. And that storyline is fascinating.
To say the least. What a creative mind to come up with something like that. So in the moment, you know, the way that this family was able to procure their jobs. I mean, they were on the phone, you know, going through social media to get ahead in life, or to try to get ahead. So very current topic, very old subject matter, you know, class inequality, the battle between the haves and have-nots.
Where this film hits on another level. It's this reference to high and low, wealth and poverty. There's lots of scenes with staircases and descent. And it's, you know, a fantastic metaphor for class difference and wealth disparity. And on that level, that, you know, is sort of what elevates it to Oscar worthy.
Definitely. All right, I feel like we need to take a deep breath after that. You know, even just talking about these films take you back to that first time you saw it in the theater, when you were blown away by that plot twist in the end. Debbie, speaking of twists, our sweet treat of the week is going to feature a different kind of twist, but a twist nonetheless. And we are talking about pretzel twists, to be exact.
All right.
So, okay, I promise you, this is probably the easiest, least complicated recipe we've ever featured on the Stir. We are making pretzel turtles.
Oh
What
my God.
turtles are?
Sign me up.
So we're going to use just good old-fashioned pretzel twist you get from a bag at the store. And then you are going to top that with a chocolate-covered caramel like Rolos or Dove candy. You put in the oven to melt the chocolate a bit, and then you top it with a pecan or a walnut. And there you have it, which I think is the perfect movie watching treat. It's, a perfect one-bite hit of the classic sweet and salty flavor combination. So
Awesome.
easy to make. You can go crazy with these.
I love it. The idea that there's a little fudge shop up where we go in Michigan every summer that makes something very similar. And now you're making me like sort of long for that.
Run to the store and grab a bag of pretzels. Well, I promise you, this is so easy. You can definitely run out, make it right now if you wanted to. We will have that recipe for you on gazellemagazine.com.
Awesome.
All right. So once again, Debbie Baldwin has proven why she is such a binge bestie. Thank you, Deb, for another binge-worthy movie list.
Thanks, Trish.
All right. We will see you next time. Thank you all for joining us. Bye.